The crash of glass jolted Ethan Harrington awake long before his mind could catch up. For a single breath, he froze in the darkness of his penthouse bedroom, convinced someone had broken into his Upper East Side palace. But then came a softer sound, almost apologetic, the faint clink of dishes meeting stone. It was 3 a.m, and someone was in his kitchen. Ethan pushed himself out of bed, the silk of his robe whispering against his skin. He moved through the marble corridor, its polished floor reflecting the cold gleam of the city lights sneaking through the tall windows. New York slept fitfully far below, but inside the penthouse silence usually reigned with the authority of a monarch. Tonight, that silence was fractured, not shattered. Fractured like a secret trying to hide. He paused near the kitchen entrance, every instinct sharpened by decades of reading crisis before it struck. The sound came again. Water running, a plate being set down too gently, as if its handler feared even a whisper would betray them. Ethan placed one hand on the heavy oak door and pushed it open. The sight hit him harder than any burglar ever could. A girl, slight and exhausted, was bent over the deep, stainless steel sink. The harsh yellow glow of the stove's hood lamp carved shadows across her back. She scrubbed a crystal wine glass with the urgency of someone trying to hold her world together with only raw hands and stubborn will. Strands of dark honey hair clung to her damp temples. Her shoulders shook each time she inhaled, as if her lungs no longer believed in breathing. It was Emma Alvarez, 18 years old, daughter of his housekeeper Maria. And she looked as though life had already asked far too much of her. Ethan stepped fully inside. The girl spun, startled so violently she nearly dropped the glass. For a heartbeat, he saw sheer terror in her eyes, the kind of terror that never belonged on someone so young. "Mr. Harrington." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, sir. I did not mean to wake you." She grabbed a towel and wiped her hands in frantic, clumsy motions, as if trying to erase physical evidence of her being there. Her fingers were red, almost raw. The skin along her knuckles looked swollen. She held herself like she expected punishment. Ethan's gaze swept the kitchen. The island counters were buried in the aftermath of his dinner party from earlier that night. 30 guests, 30 place settings. Enough dishes to break a grown man's back, let alone a girl's. And Emma stood among them, a fragile figure in the cavernous kitchen, drowning in a task meant for a team. "What are you doing here at this hour?" he asked. His voice came out much softer than he intended. "My mother is sick," Emma answered too quickly, too rehearsed. "Just a cold, sir. She felt terrible about leaving the dishes after your event. I told her I would take care of everything so she could rest." A lie. He knew lies. He had built an empire on seeing them long before anyone spoke a word. She was protecting something or someone, but the truth lurked behind her trembling posture. At this distance, he could see the hollows beneath her eyes. Not shadows. Bruises of exhaustion. He saw the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing toward the service door as though planning an escape. "You should be at home," Ethan said. "You have school in the morning." A tiny flinch crossed her face. Barely there. But he caught it. He had built multi-continent shipping routes by noticing flinches like that across polished conference tables. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I'll finish quickly. I promise I won't disturb you." She turned back to the sink, desperate to disappear. But Ethan did not leave. He watched her wash plate after plate, her small hands trembling under the steaming water. Something about her movements held a frantic rhythm, as if she believed washing dishes at 3 a.m. might save her from something worse. Then he saw it. By the service door lay a faded navy backpack, the seams strained as though life kept stuffing more weight into it. On the zipper hung a bright blue and gold honor cord, valedictorian colors, and in the mesh pocket was a framed photograph of a soldier in uniform. The image was old, the edges scuffed, but the pride in the soldier's posture was unmistakable. Ethan stared at the backpack a long moment. Emma Alvarez, valedictorian, presidential scholar candidate if memory served, a young woman with her entire life waiting. Yet here she stood with broken hands in his kitchen at an hour meant for ghosts. This pattern made no sense, and Ethan Harrington hated broken patterns more than he hated insomnia. "Emma," he said, "leave the dishes." She froze. Slowly she turned to him, her lips parted in confusion, fear rising behind her eyes like a storm tide. "Sir, leave them," he repeated. "Go home, get some sleep. My mother, she'll worry. She'll think she'll be in trouble." "I will speak with Maria in the morning," Ethan said. His tone left no space for argument. For a moment, something like defeat washed over Emma's face, as if she had failed at some mission no one had asked her to undertake. She pulled off the heavy apron, grabbed her backpack, and slipped toward the service door. But before she vanished into the muted pre-dawn city, she paused. The light caught her profile, illuminating the exhaustion etched into her features. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. Then she disappeared into the early morning darkness, leaving Ethan alone among the untouched dishes, the faint scent of soap, and the unmistakable sense that he had just glimpsed the edge of a tragedy he did not yet understand. When the door closed, silence returned to the penthouse. But it no longer felt peaceful. It pulsed with questions. And beneath them all, a whisper of something Ethan had not felt in a very long time. Responsibility. He stood there, the honor cord burned into his memory, the soldier's photograph lingering behind his eyes, and he knew sleep would not come. Not until he uncovered the truth hiding behind a girl's trembling hands at 3 a.m. Dawn had barely touched the skyline when Ethan Harrington sat in his study, the city stretched beneath him like a restless creature. He had not slept a moment. Sleep had become impossible the second Emma Alvarez fled into the dark, with fear written across her shoulders. The penthouse still held the faint echo of her presence, the scent of dish soap hanging in the air like an unspoken secret. Ethan stared at the untouched dishes, knowing the girl had left much more behind than dirty plates. He lowered himself into the leather chair, but the room felt colder than ever. The honor cord, bright blue and gold, burned in his memory like a warning flare. A valedictorian does not wash dishes at 3 a.m. unless the world is pressing down with merciless weight. And that photograph of the soldier, worn and framed, as if treasured beyond measure, had struck him with a strange, unwelcome familiarity. His instincts, honed through decades of crisis negotiations and corporate warfare, whispered that Emma's lie was only the smallest surface ripple of a much deeper trouble. At 7:00 sharp, Ethan picked up the phone. His voice carried none of the fatigue he felt. He called Daniel Price, his chief of staff, a man who had served him loyally for more than 20 years. Daniel answered immediately, polished and professional, even at this early hour. Ethan explained what he had witnessed in the kitchen, every detail delivered with the precision of a man recounting a potential threat. But this time, the threat was not to a corporation. It was to a child. A brilliant child drowning in silence. Daniel hesitated only a breath before beginning his investigation. Ethan listened to the quiet tapping of keys on the other end, a sound that always signaled answers approaching. Within minutes, Daniel returned with the first wave of information. Maria Alvarez, Emma's mother, had been missing work far too often in the past 2 months, citing illness repeatedly. Daniel admitted that he had been preparing paperwork for potential dismissal, a fact that filled Ethan with an unexpected surge of anger. The Alvarez family had never asked for pity, yet they clearly needed help. The second revelation came with a heaviness that settled deep in Ethan's chest. Emma was not simply a strong student. She was the top student, valedictorian at Ridgeview High School, 4.0 grade point average, named a United States Presidential Scholar less than a month earlier, awarded a full scholarship to Columbia University with a letter of congratulations from the admissions board. And yet, as of 25 days ago, she had stopped attending school altogether. Her absence had triggered warnings, then truancy notices, and finally, an irreversible administrative process. She had already missed the final deadline to accept her scholarship. Ethan felt the impact like a physical blow. A brilliant life, meticulously built by discipline and talent, was collapsing in silence. He demanded to know why. Why would a presidential scholar walk away from a future she had earned with every drop of effort in her body? Why would a valedictorian choose grease-stained countertops and bruised knuckles over classrooms and opportunity? Why had she been terrified when he simply spoke her name? Daniel's voice lowered as he continued. Maria Alvarez was not recovering from a cold. She had been diagnosed with severe lupus, a form so aggressive that the standard treatments had begun failing. The new medication her doctor recommended had been rejected by insurance as experimental. The out-of-pocket cost was $900 every month. Maria had already lost her second job due to her illness. Their phone service had been shut off weeks earlier to save money. Their remaining income was Maria's cleaning job in Ethan's penthouse. And even that was slipping beyond her strength. Ethan sat motionless as the truth crystallized. Emma had been coming to his home at night, cleaning in her mother's place, working without pay to keep Maria from losing their only remaining job and the insurance attached to it. She had taken a night shift at a diner, while attempting to manage the house cleaning alone, hiding every trace of Maria's illness. She was sacrificing her education, her future, and the scholarship of a lifetime to keep her mother alive. The last piece of information arrived quietly, yet it struck Ethan in a way nothing else had. Daniel found the identity of the soldier in the photograph in Emma's backpack. Captain James Alvarez, former officer of Baker Company, 101st Airborne Division, a man of distinction and honor. A man whose name Ethan had not heard spoken aloud in decades. Because Baker Company was the unit where his older brother, Michael Harrington, had served and died. Ethan's breath left him in a single, sharp exhale. Memories he had locked away since youth surged back like a rising tide. His brother, 21 years old, laughing in the photograph that still sat on a shelf in Ethan's study. The day the military car arrived at their family's home. The way his mother collapsed, her world torn apart. And then the letters, 3 of them, written by Captain James Alvarez. Letters that gave his grieving mother a reason to keep breathing. Letters that told her Michael had not died alone, that he had been brave, that he had saved lives. Those letters had been kindness in its purest form, a gift that had held Ethan's family together when they were falling apart. Now the granddaughter of that same man was destroying her future in the shadows of his home. Ethan rose from his chair with a clarity that felt like steel. He had built a global empire by recognizing when patterns threatened to break. And this pattern, the collapse of a young life that never should have been left to suffer, demanded an intervention. He would not stand by while a debt owed for half a century remained unpaid. He would not let a child sink beneath responsibilities no 18-year-old should bear. Without waiting another minute, Ethan grabbed his keys. The truth was no longer enough. He needed answers. He needed to look into Maria's eyes. He needed to see the place where Emma returned after each long, brutal night. And somewhere deep in his chest, beneath the layers of success and age and loss, he felt something he had not felt since Michael died. A duty, a promise being called due, a debt waking after 50 silent years. The apartment complex in Queens looked as though time had stopped visiting it years ago. Paint peeled from the walls like curling petals, the stairwell smelled faintly of boiled cabbage, an old carpet, and the dim hallway lights flickered like exhausted fireflies. Ethan Harrington climbed each step with a tightening in his chest and the weight of what he had learned pressing heavier with every floor. He had sat in boardrooms where billions shifted on a single decision. Yet he had never felt the same haunting sense of responsibility that now gripped him as he reached Unit 3B. He knocked once. A pause. Then the slow, painful scraping of metal. The door opened only as far as its chain allowed, revealing a wary eye peering through the crack. The voice that followed was soft, strained, and unmistakably afraid. Yes. Who is it? Ethan took a careful step back into the hallway light. Maria, it is Ethan Harrington. I came to see you. The chain rattled, then the door shut abruptly. For a heartbeat, silence pooled thick in the air. When it opened again, the woman facing him had aged far beyond her years. Maria Alvarez, once a strong and graceful presence in his home, now looked hollowed out as though illness had carved pieces from her. Her hands, swollen and stiff, clutched a metal walker. Her skin held a gray pallor that no light could warm, and her eyes shimmered with a shame she tried desperately to hide. "Mr. Harrington," she whispered, I was going to call. I just needed a few days to gather myself." Ethan stepped inside before she could finish. The apartment was spotless, almost painfully so, but dreadfully cold. A single electric heater glowed weakly in the corner, unable to warm even a single room. The furniture was sparse, the walls bare, the air tinged with quiet desperation. Ethan had seen poverty in many countries, yet something about this particular space and this woman struck him with brutal clarity. This was not momentary hardship. This was a battlefield where a mother had been fighting alone. He spoke gently, unsure how much truth Maria could bear in one moment. "I saw Emma last night." Maria's composure shattered instantly. She sank onto the worn sofa, gripping her walker, as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the world. "Oh God," she whispered. "She promised me she would not go back there. I told her I could still work. I told her I could manage." Her voice broke. Ethan sat across from her elbows, resting on his knees, eyes steady. "Maria, why did you not tell me you were ill? Why hide this?" She could not meet his gaze. "Because I cannot lose this job. Because the insurance is the only thing keeping us afloat. Because illness always brings excuses, and excuses get people fired." She covered her face as tears spilled through her fingers. "I thought I had a few months left. I never meant for Emma to carry this." Ethan let her speak until the storm of her confession weakened. Then he asked the question that had been burning in him all morning. "Maria, where is Emma right now?" The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. When she finally answered, the words were soaked in guilt. "She took a night shift at a diner. The Harbor Light. She works there until near midnight, then comes home to check on me. And then she goes to your penthouse to finish my tasks, so Daniel will not know. She sleeps maybe 2 hours, sometimes none. In that moment, the truth solidified into something sharp. Emma had not simply stepped up to help. She had built herself into a shield against the world, sacrificing her future piece by piece. Ethan stood, every muscle tightened with a resolve he could not ignore. The girl was collapsing under responsibilities that would crush most adults, and all because her mother had been too proud or too frightened to accept help. But he was not angry with them. He was angry with a world that had allowed two women to suffer in silence, while he, with all his power, had remained oblivious. The apartment trembled as a distant train passed. Maria looked up at him through red, swollen eyes. "Please, Mr. Harrington, Emma cannot lose this job. I will get better. I will go back to work. Just do not punish her. She was trying to protect me. I would rather lose everything than see my daughter ashamed." Ethan's voice softened with a weight both ancient and personal. "I am not here to punish anyone. I am here because I owe your family a debt." Maria blinked, confused. "A debt? To us?" Ethan looked toward the small framed photograph sitting near the door. A young soldier in fatigues. Clear eyes, straight posture. The kind of man who carried others through darkness. "Your father, Captain James Alvarez," he said quietly, "once wrote letters that held my family together after my brother died. Without him, my mother might not have survived her grief. Those letters were gifts of mercy, gifts of truth. And I have carried that debt for more than 50 years. Maria stared speechless. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice to a steady, unyielding calm. "I am going to help you. Both of you. You do not have to ask. You do not have to earn it. It is already owed." Maria covered her mouth, tears trembling on her cheeks. "Mr. Harrington, we cannot accept charity. This is too much." Ethan shook his head. "It is not charity. It is a promise being kept." He looked around the cold room, then back at Maria with a resolve that felt like steel. "I will find Emma. And when I bring her home tonight, things will not be the same." Maria tried to stand, but her legs buckled beneath her. Ethan steadied her, gently guiding her back to the sofa. "Rest. I will handle this now." As he stepped into the hallway, he felt the weight of his brother's photograph tucked into his memory, the echo of Captain Alvarez's kindness stirring like a distant drumbeat. For the first time in decades, Ethan felt his life folding back onto a single purpose. A promise to a fallen brother, a debt to a soldier, a future for a girl who had been fighting alone for far too long. And tonight, that future would begin to change. The Harbor Light Diner clung to the corner of Northern Boulevard like a tired relic from another decade, its neon sign flickering against the night as if unsure whether it still belonged in this world. Ethan Harrington parked across the street, hands steady on the steering wheel, even though his pulse beat faster than he liked to admit. Through the wide windows, he saw weary patrons hunched over late meals, truckers sipping bitter coffee, and waitresses moving with practiced resignation. Then near the back, he spotted her. Emma Alvarez, in a uniform 2 sizes too large, her hair tucked under a blue net, her shoulders bowed beneath the weight of exhaustion. She moved like someone fighting gravity itself. A tray balanced on one hand, plates stacked dangerously high, her steps precise, but trembling. Every motion spoke of endurance stretched to its breaking point. Ethan watched her serve tables, refill coffee mugs, and dodge the barked orders of a stocky man behind the counter, whose stained white shirt and sour expression announced him as the manager long before the name tag did. That was Carl Benson, a man who thrived on imposing power where none was needed. Ethan entered quietly, slipping into a corner booth. The diner smelled of old grease and burnt toast, and the hum of tired conversation barely covered the rattle of dishes. When a waitress approached, he ordered a black coffee, though he had no intention of drinking it. His attention was fixed entirely on the girl who had been washing dishes in his penthouse only hours earlier. He saw her wince each time she lifted a heavy tub of plates. He saw her choke back a cough. He saw her endurance flicker like the failing neon outside. Minutes later, Emma approached the next booth, her arms laden with dishes stacked far too high. The tray wobbled and she steadied it with a trembling breath. Ethan waited until she was only a few feet away before he spoke, his voice low but unmistakable. Emma. The single word hit her like a physical blow. She froze, her eyes locking onto his. For a brief, terrible second, her face went pale as porcelain, then drained even further as if the bottom had dropped out of her world. The tray slipped from her grip. From her, plates shattered against the linoleum glasses, exploded into glittering shards. Ketchup splattered like a wound across the floor. A ripple of silence spread through the diner. Emma fell to her knees at once, hands shaking as she reached for the broken pieces. She did not seem to feel the sharp edges slicing at her skin. Her expression was a portrait of humiliation so raw it sliced into Ethan like a blade. Before he could act, Carl Benson stormed from behind the counter, red-faced and furious. "Miller, what in the hell do you think you're doing?" he barked. "That is coming out of your pay, all of it. That is a whole week's wages, you clumsy idiot." Ethan stood. His height alone commanded attention, but that was not what made the room go still. It was the coldness in his eyes, a glacial authority forged over decades of commanding boardrooms and navigating crises that shattered lesser men. He walked toward them, and Carl faltered, thrown off balance by the sudden shift in power. "That is enough," Ethan said. The words were soft, almost gentle, yet they cut through the air with a precision sharper than any shout. Carl's mouth snapped shut. The entire diner watched, breath held. "Who are you supposed to be?" Carl muttered, though his voice no longer carried its earlier bravado. Ethan did not answer. Instead, he crouched beside Emma, careful not to crowd her, and offered his hand. She stared at it, tears pooling in her eyes, shame burning across her cheeks. He spoke quietly so only she could hear. "You are done here, Emma. Stand up. You are leaving. I can't," she whispered, her breath trembling. "My shift. I need the hours. Your shift is finished." He did not wait for permission. He helped her rise, steadying her when her knees buckled. Then he reached into the inner pocket of his coat, withdrew a wallet of soft black leather, and laid several bills on the counter. 3 crisp $100 bills. The gesture was calm, almost dismissive. "That covers the dishes. And my coffee. And the inconvenience," he said, his tone icy but controlled. Carl snatched up the money eyes, gleaming with unmasked greed. Ethan turned his back on him, the dismissal absolute, and guided Emma toward the exit. She followed silently, shrinking beneath the stares of every customer, as though their eyes weighed as much as the diner trays she carried each night. Outside, the night air was cold enough to sting, but to Emma it felt like stepping into a void. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite the thick fabric of her uniform. Ethan opened the passenger door of his sedan. "Get in," he said gently. She hesitated only a moment before obeying. The doors shut with a quiet thud that seemed to seal off the chaos behind them. Once inside, she sank into the seat, as if the weight of the last month finally pulled her downward. Her breath fogged the window. Her hands lay limp in her lap, still trembling. Ethan circled to the driver's side and slid into the seat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the muted thrum of traffic in the distance and the faint whistle of wind skimming over the car roof. Emma finally whispered, I'm sorry." Ethan turned toward her. The streetlight outside cast a pale glow across her face, revealing the truth he had already begun to piece together. Exhaustion etched into her skin, fear rooted in her eyes, and underneath it all, a fierce, desperate love for her mother. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said, "but you have a great deal to explain." Her breath caught, tears welled, and before the night was over, he would hear the confession that would break his heart and reshape his understanding of what duty truly meant. The car crawled through the quiet Queen streets, and the headlights gliding over cracked sidewalks and shuttered storefronts, as though illuminating a forgotten corner of the city. Inside the sedan, the silence throbbed like a wound neither of them dared to touch. Emma Alvarez sat rigid in the passenger seat, her diner uniform stained with ketchup and grease. Her knuckles scraped raw from broken glass. She kept her eyes fixed on her hands, afraid that if she looked up, she would find Ethan Harrington studying her with disappointment. She could not bear. Ethan watched her, only in brief glances, careful not to push her fragile composure any harder than the night already had. The girl beside him looked like someone who had been fighting storms alone, someone who had held her breath for too long and no longer knew how to exhale. When her shoulders trembled, he pulled to the curb beneath a flickering street lamp, whose pale glow spilled across her face like a reluctant truth. He turned off the engine, and for a moment they sat in a cocoon of quiet, broken only by the faint hum of a distant car. "Emma," he said softly, "look at me." She didn't. Her breath hitched, and her fingers curled tightly against her palms. He waited steady as stone until she finally lifted her gaze. The moment she met his eyes, the last defenses she carried began to crumble. Her eyelids glimmered with unshed tears, and in her expression he saw exhaustion so deep it bordered on despair. "Are your hands cut?" he asked gently. The question startled her. She stared at her palms, only now seeing the thin red lines where glass had sliced through her skin. "It's fine," she whispered. "It doesn't matter." Ethan reached into the glove compartment and took out a small black first aid kit. The simple, careful motion seemed to shake her more than any raised voice could. When he pulled out an antiseptic wipe, she flinched as though kindness itself was a threat. "Give me your hand," he said. "No, please, I'll get grease on your car," she murmured, already pulling back, as though she did not deserve care. "Emma." His tone shifted, quiet but absolute. Her hand trembled as she placed it in his. Her skin felt cold, her pulse fluttering like a trapped bird. Ethan worked with practiced steadiness, cleaning each cut with deliberate gentleness. She gasped as the antiseptic stung her skin, and he murmured, "A small sting now saves a greater pain later." My brother used to say that. Something flickered in her expression, a fragile curiosity that vanished as quickly as it appeared. When he finished, he folded a handkerchief and placed it in her other hand. "For your face," he said. She wiped her cheeks with slow, careful strokes, as if clearing away the evidence of a life that had forced her to grow up far too fast. The silence between them stretched again, heavier, now charged with an unspoken plea. Then she whispered, "You shouldn't have come to the diner." "I should have gone sooner," Ethan replied. Her lips parted, a half-formed protest dying on her tongue. He leaned back, watching her with calm intensity. "I need the truth, Emma. All of it. All of, why did you stop going to school? Why were you working nights? Why throw away everything you earned?" Her breath broke. The handkerchief crumpled in her fist. "What choice did I have?" She said, her voice cracking with a sudden burst of anger and grief. "Tell me, what should I have done?" The words poured out of her like water breaking through a dam. She took a shaking breath before continuing. The day the letter came from the White House, I thought it was the best moment of my life. I ran home to show my mom. She was on the floor. She couldn't stand. She was in so much pain, she couldn't even cry. Ethan did not interrupt. He knew that any sound from him might collapse her fragile courage. "The doctor said she needed new medication," she whispered. "Not the cheap one. The one insurance won't pay for. $900 every month. And that doesn't even include the specialist or the testing." Her voice trembled as she stared ahead, seeing nothing but memory. She lost her other job weeks before. And this job? Your home. It was the only one she had left. She was terrified you'd fire her. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her bandaged hand. She tried to hide how sick she was. She could barely hold a mop. I saw her in the bathroom crying because her hands were too swollen to close around the handle. She kept saying she would be fired, that we would lose the apartment, that we would lose everything. Her breath shuddered. So I made the choice. She looked at Ethan fully now, her voice stripped to its bones. I put the scholarship letter in the trash. I called the school and told them I wasn't coming back. I blocked the principal's number on my mom's phone so she wouldn't know. I started cleaning your penthouse at night so no one would see my mom can't work. I took the night shift at the diner so I could pay for her medicine. $11 an hour. I needed just a few more weeks. Just a little more. Her voice broke entirely. What's a scholarship worth if my mom doesn't survive long enough to see me use it? The question hung in the air like a blade. Ethan felt something shift inside him, something deep and solemn, as though a door he had kept locked for years had finally opened. He saw her not as a child making reckless decisions, but as a soldier standing alone on a battlefield she never chose. He reached out and placed a steady hand over hers, grounding her. "You are not alone anymore," he said quietly. "You will not carry this by yourself. Not another night." The words were not a promise. They were a vow. The hallway of the apartment building felt narrower the second time that night, as though the very walls sensed the storm gathering between Ethan Harrington and the truth he was about to confront. Emma moved ahead of him, her shoulders slumped, her steps dragging with the weight of everything she had confessed. Ethan followed closely, steady and quiet, the controlled presence of a man who had made life-altering decisions in rooms far more intimidating than this one. Yet tonight the stakes felt infinitely higher. This was not business. This was the future of a girl who had almost surrendered hers. She fumbled with the key, her bandaged hand making the simple task momentarily impossible. When the lock finally clicked, she hesitated. It was only a second, but Ethan felt it. The fear, the shame, the terror that her mother would see her uniform, her trembling hands, her broken composure. Emma drew in a shuddering breath and pushed the door open. Maria Alvarez was already waiting. She sat hunched on the worn sofa, wrapped in a thin blanket, her swollen hands clenched together, as though holding back the worst thoughts her imagination had conjured. The moment Emma stepped inside, Maria's voice broke into the quiet like cracked porcelain. "Emma. Oh my God, what happened? Are you hurt?" Her eyes darted to the stains on Emma's uniform, the frayed apron string, the exhaustion carving deep lines across her daughter's face. Then she saw Ethan. Her expression shifted from fear to horror-born shame. She tried to stand as though instinct demanded she present herself as the hard-working, reliable woman she had always been, but her legs betrayed her, and she collapsed back into the cushions, a painful reminder of the illness she had tried so desperately to hide. "Mr. Harrington," she whispered, her voice fraying at the edges. I can explain. I did not want..." She stopped. There were not enough words in any language to bridge the distance between her intentions and their consequences. Ethan stepped forward, but slowly, gently. He refused to let his presence loom like authority descending on failure. He wanted her to hear him clearly. "Maria," he said, "I am not here to punish anyone. I came because I saw Emma tonight, and now I know everything." Emma flinched at those words. Maria's face went pale with panic. "She should not have told you," she gasped, reaching for her daughter. "Emma, no. I told you to keep quiet. I told you I could still work. I just needed a few days before going back. I can do this. Please do not punish her." Tears blurred her vision as she gripped Emma's hand in desperation. But Emma broke first. All the exhaustion, pain, guilt, and concealed panic flooded through her as she collapsed at her mother's knees. "I am trying to help you," she cried, voice cracking under the weight of truth. "I just wanted to make sure you kept your job. I wanted you to get your medicine. I could not lose you. I could not lose everything." Maria wrapped trembling arms around her daughter, cradling her as though trying to shield her from the world. Her own tears fell freely, helpless and heavy. "Oh, my baby," she whispered. "You cannot carry this alone. You are a child." "I am all you have," Emma choked. "I had to." The rawness of their pain pressed into the room like the thick air before a storm. Ethan felt it in the deepest part of himself. Memories surged unbidden. His mother grieving, his brother's absence, the weight of silence when families tried to survive without help they desperately needed. He moved closer, his voice gentle but iron strong. Emma should never have had to make that choice, and she will not have to again. Maria looked at him through blurred vision, confusion woven with fear. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "We cannot accept charity. People like us do not get saved. Life does not work that way." Ethan knelt beside them, lowering himself to their level. "This is not charity," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the certainty of stone. "This is a debt, and it is 50 years overdue." Both women stared, not understanding. Ethan glanced toward the small table near the front door. A framed photograph rested there, a young soldier in fatigue's strong posture, kind eyes. He picked it up gently, brushing his thumb across the glass. "Your father, Captain James Alvarez," he said softly. "He served in Baker Company. He served with my brother. And when my brother was killed, your father wrote letters to my mother that kept her alive. He gave her courage when the world had taken everything else." Maria's breath caught. Emma stared stunned. Ethan continued, his voice thick with memories long buried. Those letters were more than words. They were a lifeline, a mercy, a gift to a family drowning in grief. I have carried that gift my entire life. He met Maria's gaze directly. "I intend to repay it." Maria's face crumpled not from shame but from disbelief. You owe us nothing. I owe you everything," Ethan corrected. "And tonight, we begin to settle that debt." He set the photo down with reverence and rose to his full height, quiet power radiating from him. "Tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, a car will take you to New York Presbyterian Hospital. You will see one of the best specialists in the country. Your treatment, your medication, your transportation, all of it is covered." Maria shook her head as tears streamed down her face. "I cannot let you." "You can," Ethan said. "You must." He turned to Emma next. "And you will return to Ridgeview High School. At 8:30, my assistant Daniel will meet you there. Your absences will be excused. Your tests will be rescheduled. Your scholarship will be restored." Emma's breath stopped. "But I missed the deadline." "Deadlines bend," Ethan said simply, "especially when the right person applies pressure." The room fell still. It was not disbelief anymore. It was hope, trembling, fragile, dangerous. Hope that neither woman dared trust yet. Ethan stepped back toward the door, but paused with one hand on the frame. His voice softened, carrying something close to affection. You are no longer fighting alone. Not tonight. Not ever again. And as he left the apartment, seemed to breathe for the first time in months. Morning arrived, not as a gentle easing of light, but as a tidal shift that swept through the lives of the Alvarez women with startling speed. The world outside their apartment awakened in soft shades of gray. But inside, a different kind of dawn was unfolding, one forged from urgency, fear, and the first fragile threads of hope. Emma dressed in silence, smoothing the wrinkles from her only decent blouse, her fingers trembling as she buttoned it. Across the room, Maria sat upright in her chair, wrapped in a clean sweater Ethan had insisted they purchase the night before. Her swollen hands lay folded in her lap, and every so often she glanced at her daughter as if trying to memorize her. At 8 o'clock exactly, there was a knock at the door. Emma froze for a heartbeat, then opened it to find a tall, composed man in a crisp gray suit. Daniel Price introduced himself with a polite nod, his voice calm, polished, and precise. He spoke to Emma as though she were an equal, not a child who had spent weeks cleaning floors and refilling coffee cups. If you are ready, he said gently, we should go. Your principal is expecting us. Emma glanced back at her mother. Maria managed to smile, though it trembled at the edges. You can do this, she whispered. Go take back what you earned. Emma hugged her before following Daniel into the hallway. As the door closed, Maria's breath caught in her throat, a mixture of pride and terror, rising in equal measure. She had relied on her daughter for too long. Now she had to let others help. The drive to Ridgeview High School felt strangely quiet, even though Daniel spoke just enough to keep Emma calm. He explained the outline of their meeting, the documents he carried from New York Presbyterian, the letters from specialists confirming Maria's critical condition. Emma listened, clutching her backpack like a shield. Her mind racing with memories of the last 25 days she had spent avoiding this very building. She had walked away from her future because life demanded it. Now she was walking back toward it with the help of a man she had once believed untouchable. When they arrived, the hallways buzzed with the usual morning chaos. But the moment Emma stepped inside, the noise dulled beneath a wave of curious stares. Students whispered her name. Some looked confused, others relieved, a few guilty. Rumors had formed in the weeks she vanished, none of them close to the truth. Emma kept her eyes forward as Daniel guided her to the administrative office. The door opened to reveal Principal Dwight, a woman whose stern presence had intimidated generations of students. But the moment she saw Emma, her icy composure shattered. Oh, sweetheart, she said, rushing forward. We were so worried. We had no idea what was happening. Her voice broke. It was the reaction of someone who truly cared. Daniel stepped forward and handed her the file Ethan had prepared. Medical reports, official letters, signed statements. Principal Dwight read each page with widening eyes and tightening lips. When she looked up again, her expression was equal parts grief and determination. Emma, she said firmly, none of this is your fault. You will take your final exams. We will reinstate your records, and I will personally speak to Columbia's admissions board. The relief hit Emma so suddenly she almost swayed. Daniel steadied her with a discreet hand. Paperwork was signed. Plans were made. Her teachers were informed. By the time she left the office, Emma felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted from crumbling stone to something solid again. She walked to her first exam classroom, head high, the honor cord in her backpack, brushing against her books like a reminder of who she had been and who she might still become. While she faced her tests across the city, Maria prepared for what felt like a different kind of exam. At 9 o'clock sharp, a sleek, black car arrived to take her to New York Presbyterian. She trembled as she eased into the back seat, her walker folded beside her. She had lived with pain for months, but nothing frightened her like accepting help. Yet as the car pulled into traffic, something inside her eased. She was not alone. Not anymore. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to hope that pain did not have to be permanent. At the hospital, she was greeted by nurses who knew her name. Dr. Patel shook her hand gently and spoke with a confidence that soothed her frayed nerves. "We are going to help you," the doctor said. "You have been carrying this far too long." Maria felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. She wanted to face this with dignity. As the hours passed, both mother and daughter fought their own battles. Emma scribbled answers with a ferocity that came from having nearly lost everything. Each question she answered felt like reclaiming a piece of her identity. Meanwhile, Maria underwent tests, blood work, and consultations, her exhaustion deep, but her gratitude deeper. That afternoon, when Emma returned home, she found the apartment unusually warm. A delivery of groceries sat neatly stacked in the kitchen. Bags of fresh produce, cartons of eggs, warm bread, and even a small bouquet of sunflowers that Daniel had quietly ordered on Ethan's behalf. Emma smiled for the first time in weeks, a true, unguarded smile that softened her entire face. When Maria returned later, a nurse escorted her up the stairs. She looked tired, but different. Lighter, hopeful. They embraced in the doorway, holding each other tightly, neither speaking for a long moment. Then Maria whispered, "It is going to get better." Emma closed her eyes, letting those words settle deep inside her. That evening, as they sat together on the sofa, eating real food for the first time in days, Emma's phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. Columbia University had reopened her file, and they wanted to speak with her the next morning. Emma set the phone down slowly. Her hands shook, but not from fear, from possibility. The tide was turning. The future she had buried was rising again. And for the first time since the world began to collapse around them, Emma believed she might actually reach it. Summer swept through the city with a gentleness New York rarely offered, as though the world itself understood that the Alvarez family had endured enough storms. The weeks that followed were a blur of change, healing, and small miracles stitched together with quiet determination. Emma attended her meetings with Columbia's admissions board, completed every missed requirement, and earned back her full scholarship with a level of grace that impressed even the sternest administrators. Each evening she returned home to find her mother growing stronger, her pain easing under the careful guidance of Dr. Patel's team. Maria's treatments began to show results. The swelling in her hands diminished. Her steps steadied. She could move through the apartment without leaning on the walker for every shift of weight. It was not a cure, but it was hope, and hope had a way of lighting even the dimmest rooms. Ethan visited often, never unannounced, but always welcome, bringing quiet reassurance, rather than attention. He spoke with Maria in ways that made her straighten her posture, reminding her that she was not merely a patient, but a woman of strength and legacy. One afternoon, near the end of August, Maria asked Ethan to sit with her in the small living room, the same space where despair had swallowed her weeks before. The air now carried a softness warmed by the hum of a reliable heater and the scent of fresh groceries stocked neatly in the cabinets. She folded her now steadier hands on her lap and met Ethan's gaze with a clarity he had not seen in months. "I want to work," she said. her voice steady. Not out of obligation, not because I owe a debt, but because I need purpose. I cannot sit here being taken care of forever. Ethan had been waiting for those words. He reached into his briefcase and placed a stack of file boxes on the coffee table. "Then I have something for you," he replied. "My mother created a small fund many years ago, the Baker Company Fund. She meant it to help the children and grandchildren of veterans. A little support, a little kindness, exactly when they needed it most." Maria touched the top box gently, as though afraid it might vanish. "Why has no one heard of it?" "Because," Ethan said with a rueful smile, "I let it fall dormant. Business consumed me, but it is time to revive it properly. It needs someone to read these letters, understand these families, and carry the heart of the fund." He held her gaze. He held. "It needs someone like you." Maria's breath trembled, not with fear, but with something far more profound. "You trust me with this, I do," he said simply. "More than you know." And with that, Maria Alvarez found not just recovery, but purpose. As summer faded into late August, Emma prepared for her move to Columbia University. She folded her few belongings into 2 modest suitcases while her mother organized the new files for the fund, pausing often to admire her daughter with pride that shone brighter than the morning light. On Emma's last morning at home, a familiar sedan pulled up outside their building. Ethan stepped out dressed in a simple gray suit, carrying a medium-sized box. "All set for your next chapter?" he asked, offering Emma the faintest smile, a smile that was somehow both paternal and respectful. Emma nodded, excitement and nerves swirling in her eyes. He opened the box and handed her a new laptop, sleek and powerful, something she would need for her political science courses. But the second item inside was what made her breath falter. A small wooden frame. Inside it, a worn photograph. Her grandfather, Captain James Alvarez. And beside him, a young soldier with the same sharp eyes and familiar grin. Michael Harrington. Emma held the frame like a sacred relic. "This was yours," she whispered. "Your brother's." "It was in his wallet when his effects were returned," Ethan said quietly. "My mother kept the original. But this copy, this one was his, and he would want you to have it, to remind you what you are made of." She reached forward and embraced him. Not a small, polite hug, a real one, full of gratitude, strength, and the unspoken connection that had grown between them. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice thick, "for seeing me, for saving us." Ethan's throat tightened. He placed a hand gently on her back before stepping away. "Go," he said softly. "The world is waiting." Emma climbed into the taxi, hugging the framed photograph to her chest. As the car began to pull away, she looked back. Her mother stood tall beside Ethan, no longer leaning on a walker, her eyes bright with pride and possibility. Ethan's arm rested lightly across her shoulders, steady, protective, familiar. They watched together as Emma's future moved down the street toward Manhattan, toward Columbia, toward every dream she had nearly surrendered. And as the taxi turned the corner, Ethan lifted his gaze to the wide blue sky. For decades he had carried a debt he believed he owed to the past. But he understood now that debts like these were meant to be paid forward into the future, into lives capable of rising from impossible odds. He exhaled slowly, a long breath that felt like the easing of an old wound. For the first time in many years, a quiet peace settled over him. Tonight he thought he might finally sleep. In the end, this story reminds us of a truth that experts in human resilience have long understood: lives are not transformed by grand gestures alone, but by the quiet, steadfast decisions to show up for one another. When compassion meets action, the trajectory of an entire generation can change. Emma's future was not saved by luck, but by a single man recognizing that no one rises alone, and no debt of kindness ever truly expires. If this journey moved, you let it be a reminder of the extraordinary impact one choice can carry. If you'd like more stories that explore the hidden strengths in ordinary lives, consider liking this video and subscribing so we can keep traveling through these powerful moments together. And before you go, drop a quick comment to share how this story made you feel. Just type "Rise with Hope"